Well, good morning and Merry Christmas. I think a lot of people have taken off early for Christmas here, but thank you all for coming this morning. As many of you know, I am the co-chair of the Council of Governors, which is 10 governors that advise the Pentagon, the National Guard, and Homeland Security. And cybersecurity is one of the Council's top priorities that we've been discussing the last several meetings. In July of last year, the Council of Governors, along with representatives of the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, approved a joint action plan to improve our nation's cybersecurity posture. A key component of this plan is coordination between federal and state governments and private sector partners. To that end, I am today issuing an executive order. I'm not going to read the whole of it, but we'll be making it available as soon as I've already signed it, and it's relatively long and detailed. But it calls for additional action in two areas. First is to draft a state of Iowa cybersecurity strategy that will detail the steps the state of Iowa needs to increase our resilience to cyber attacks. The Iowa Office of Chief Information Officer will be the lead agency in this effort and will be assisted by the Departments of Public Safety and Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Iowa Communications Network, and the Iowa National Guard. Jeff Franklin, who is the state of Iowa's Deputy Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer, will tell you more about these efforts in a few minutes. The second action covered by this executive order is updating the Iowa Emergency Response Plan in order to better deal with the physical consequences of cyber attack against the state's critical infrastructure. The Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management will be the lead agency for this plan update. Mark Scouten, director of that department, is here also to talk about those efforts. But first, I want to turn it over to Lieutenant Governor Kim Reynolds to tell you more about these activities that have led to the executive order.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Governor Branstad. The state of Iowa has been working to improve cybersecurity for quite some time through the Office of Chief Information Officer. In December of 2014, Governor Branstad formed a state cyber working group to expand on the work that was being done at the national level. The group comprised of state agencies and key federal and private partners to look at ways to prevent, detect, respond, and to recover from cyber threats in Iowa. State agencies involved in the group are the Office of Chief Information Officer, the Iowa National Guard, the Department of Public Safety, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and the Iowa Communications Network. In addition, the FBI, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, private industry, and the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center have participated in this group. The results from this group's work are the foundation for the executive order that the governor has signed today. Every day we hear about new threats and successful and high-profile attacks and the serious consequences of those attacks. It is a rapidly growing threat, and we all know that we must be prepared to respond. As Governor Branstad mentioned, one of the components of the executive order is ensuring that the state's emergency response plan is updated so that the state may deal with the physical consequences of cyber attacks to our state's critical infrastructure. And so now what I'd like to do is introduce Mark Scouten, who is the director of the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and he's going to talk to you about those efforts. Director Scouten.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Reynolds. As the Lieutenant Governor has said, the Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management will be closely involved in future cybersecurity efforts for the state of Iowa. In his executive order, Governor Branstad has directed our department to update the state's emergency response plan to help us deal more effectively with a significant cyber attack against our state's critical infrastructure. Iowa's emergency response plan details the overall management and coordination of the state's response to a number of different disasters and emergencies. This multi-hazard plan employs a standard set of functional capabilities to to address a wide range of hazardous conditions. One of the hazards that we face today is that posed by a cyber attack. A cyber attack against our state's critical infrastructure, such as our electrical, gas, or water systems, could cause significant damage to property, loss of life, or lead to civil unrest. And although we are currently aware of no credible cyber threats of this scope against our state, like floods, tornadoes, and winter storms, it's important that we be prepared to respond to a significant cyber attack should one occur. The update to the state's emergency response plan will be part of a broader Iowa cybersecurity strategy as requested by the governor in his executive order. And to hear more about that strategy, I'll turn it over to Jeff Franklin, the state's Chief Information Security Officer.
Thank you, Director Scouten. Good morning. My name is Jeff Franklin. I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Iowa and have been asked to lead the efforts to carry out Governor Brandstadt's executive order. Every day we see cyber thieves attempting to access the private information of Iowans that is retained by our government institutions. No person and no organization is immune from this threat. While we've already taken numerous steps to secure our information, today's executive order is very significant and raises our level of commitment to combat this threat. The Office of the Chief Information Officer will be collaborating closely with the Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Iowa Communications Network, the Iowa National Guard, the Iowa Department of Public Safety, and many others as we begin our work. Going forward, our office will begin coordinating and planning to build Iowa's cybersecurity strategy. Some of the elements that we'll be looking at as part of this strategy include an assessment of the state's cybersecurity infrastructure and activities, identifying cybersecurity awareness and training needs, identifying opportunities to educate the public, and presenting recommendations for cutting-edge science, technology, education, and math training programs, or STEM. We're appreciative of the support of the Governor's Office and leadership on this important topic and look forward to presenting our findings and recommendations for making our state's digital resources more secure. Thank you.
Okay, we also have some other departments available to answer questions in the event you have any detailed questions on this. We'd be glad to respond to any questions. Well, it's hard to say what's the most likely threat. You're probably aware the federal government had a major breach that has impacted the people that have, security, like high-level security clearances. That's been a huge problem that people are dealing with all across the country. I think the state of South Carolina had a big one. We're trying to be as well prepared as we can be to avoid, but it's hard to predict what it could be or where it could come from. But this is something that being prepared and being vigilant and trying to put in place as many safeguards as possible hopefully avoids these kind of things happening in our state. Somebody have an answer to what's been done with regard to that? Obviously, UNI is under the Board of Regents, but
Sure. So the University of Northern Iowa has a Chief Information Security Officer that oversees the organization in response to those efforts. So while we collaborate and work with them and information share, they led the response on that effort.
Right, that's right. This is the executive branch of government, which is the biggest part of state government, and but we're also trying to do what we can to coordinate with the private sector, with utility companies and others that have vulnerabilities as well. That's a good question. Would you go ahead?
they may have private email servers, they may have their own email addresses, but to do secret or top secret information, it's quite clear here in the state of Iowa that they must use secure systems. There's a whole set of rules that deal with documents that are classified at the secret or top secret level. Those procedures are in effect and are being utilized here in the state of Iowa for secret and top secret information. I think I can safely assure you that there are no secret or top secret messages that are being passed in Iowa on unsecured email systems. Threat analysis, who those entities are, or what is, or is it, is your, yeah, the entities would be the National Guard, Department of Public Safety, our office, Homeland Security, Emergency Management, the ICN. There are a number of agencies in the state that handle, including the governor, the lieutenant governor, may have access to classified information, but there are pretty certain and secure structures that are in place to make sure that information is not released.
My schedule is not top secret. It is a public information. It's always been that way. I will say that once a month, Lieutenant Governor and I and Chief of Staff go down to the Fusion Center with the Department of Public Safety, and we get a briefing that sometimes also includes some top secret information. It includes all kinds of different things, some of which are top secret, some of which are just keeping us up to speed on what's going on in terms of public safety and law enforcement type issues. Well, obviously, roads and bridges and electrical utility, all kinds of utilities. They can, you know, if you were to knock out the electric generation or the distribution of electricity or natural gas or all those things, these could be very disruptive. So those kind of utilities are very important, as well as obviously the financial, we have significant financial institutions in the state, and obviously I think you're aware of the efforts that were made last year with regard to the Department of Revenue and people filing for refunds against somebody else's tax return, and they use some of the tax filing services to do that. And so that was a problem all over, but it was a problem that we had here, a bigger problem in some other states. But so we need to be aware of and prepared for all kinds of cyber attacks, and that's what we're trying to do. Being co-chair of this governor's council, I get an opportunity at least a couple times a year, and we have a couple of conference calls in between to get updates and work directly with the Pentagon, the National Guard, and Homeland Security, all of which are very concerned about the threats in this area. Okay, the report, the update will be given July 1, and that will be public. So in the meantime, Mr. Franklin will be leading this effort with the collaboration of all these other departments and agencies, and we will get that report, and that will be made public as of July 1. I don't know. Roxanne, do you want to answer that question? Yeah, and that's a problem. A lot of this stuff is top secret, and you really, you'd like to be able to take credit for the problems that have been avoided, but we really can't. We really can't talk publicly about those things. But you know, we just need to be very vigilant and increase our efforts and update our system so we're as effective in fighting this cyber attacks as possible. Other questions on the subject? We'd be glad to respond to your questions on other subjects as well today. And we've been working on those things. And in fact, we had a really good meeting with the CMS people, with our Department of Human Services. And so those are well along their way of being resolved. We feel very confident that this will be able to take effect March 1. As you know, we already had extended the safe harbor to those providers that hadn't signed a contract for 90 days, actually, which would be till April 1, prior to HHS's decision. Good for you. Well, first of all, the Medicaid patients will be able to stay under the present, be covered by the present Medicaid system for the 60-day period. And then depends upon whether your doctor signs up with one of the three contractors that have been approved. But I think by time we get to March 1, most of them will have. And even then, you can go to your providers, but their reimbursement, will be 100% until April 1. After April 1, if you go to a provider that has refused to participate in this new system, their reimbursement, you can still go to them. It's just a question of whether, and then their reimbursement, if they refuse to participate, is at 90%. But the safe harbor means they will all be paid at 100% for until April 1. Well, first of all, I'm not going to do like Obama. I'm not going to lie about what this system is going to do. I'm going to tell you the truth. We're doing what 20 some other states have already done, and several others. I think when we get all done with this, be well over 30 states that have gone to managed care, including states like New York and California. So when Hillary Clinton attacks our efforts here, we're doing exactly what New York has already been doing under a Democratic governor, using, I think, the same providers, or about three of the same providers we're looking at. So I think we need to get past the politics and look at what we can do to provide the best healthcare services to the citizens. And our goal is for people to be able to go to the doctors that they have been, but it does depend upon those doctors agreeing to the new system. It is a new system. The old system was based on, the number of procedures you conducted. The new system is based more on outcomes. And I designed to try to coordinate the services where you have multiple specialists that are providing services to one patient that has chronic disease. We want to make sure that that's coordinated, so you don't have one doctor prescribing one medicine that conflicts with what is being prescribed by another doctor, which causes an adverse consequence, and the person ends up back in the hospital, which costs more money. And that's where a significant amount of the savings comes from. Well, hopefully not, but I'm not going to try to predict what courts could do. The final decision was made by Janet Phipps, which coincided with the preliminary recommendation, which came from the administrative law judge. We believe that the three firms, the three managed care firms that have been approved, are an adequate number. If you go back to the original RFP, it said 2 to 4. So we're going to end up with 3. And, we can't prevent people from filing lawsuits or appealing to the courts and whatever, but we intend to go ahead and make this transition as smooth as possible, and learning from what's been done in the other states to provide the best care we can to improve healthy outcomes for people under Medicaid, something that has not happened in the past, and something that we think is critically important if we're going to continue with our efforts to become a healthier state. Well, they will be working with them, making them aware of the other 3 providers, and they'll have obviously some time here between now and March 1 to get that done. Well, first of all, I'm the governor of the first in the nation caucus state. I want to be a good host and make all of the candidates feel welcome, and I think we've done a good job of that. I think it is a loss that Senator Graham has dropped out of the race. He's very knowledgeable on foreign policy. He's made a huge commitment personally to protect the safety and well-being of Americans. Nobody has probably gone more to Iraq and Afghanistan than he has, or is more knowledgeable on these issues. He also has a great sense of humor. I enjoyed very much the interaction I had with him. I remember he called me and said he learned 2 things about Iowa. You need to love Jesus and ethanol. and so that just kind of shows you something about Lindsey Graham. And he will continue to serve in the United States Senate. I think he is a voice of reason. He's somebody that is able to work sometimes across party lines to accomplish things. And I wish him the very best. I appreciate the time he spent in Iowa. And I want the other candidates all to continue to feel welcome. There's a lot of time between now and February 1. And, the old saying is, the only poll that counts is the one they take on election day, in this case on caucus day. And it's important to finish strong. And I encourage the other candidates that are in the race to work hard, spend a lot of time in Iowa between now and February 1 and finish strong. Conventional wisdom is almost always wrong. Every race is different. Now, this is coming from somebody that's never lost. And the reason why I think I've never lost an election is too many candidates run the last campaign. You don't want to do that. You always want to focus on the future, and you want to look at the issues of the day. And the issues can change dramatically, as they have since the bombing that occurred, since the killing that occurred in Paris and what happened in California. National defense and protecting the safety of the citizens of this country has become a much bigger issue. There are still other important issues like the massive federal debt that we're facing, the lack of follow through of this administration, things like renewable fuel standard, which is critically important to reduce our dependency on foreign oil and increase jobs and income in our state. So those are still important and key issues that we need to also focus on. But obviously, protecting the safety of Americans is of primary concern to a lot of our citizens. And obviously, I think the candidates are coming to realize that. I think so. A couple of things that changed. One of the things is the huge amount of money that's coming from these super PACs, the groups that they're really not accountable and they can't coordinate with the candidates, so they can provide substantial amount of money. And before, oftentimes candidates would run out of money, so they drop out. So the super PACs have probably changed this somewhat. I still think Iowa will winnow the field, and maybe it won't be just 3 tickets out of here, but maybe 4 or 5. But I think if you're not in the top 4 or 5 in Iowa, it's going to be more difficult going forward, because in it, New Hampshire is, 9 days later, and then you got South Carolina, and it goes on, and it all happens pretty quickly. So I think Iowa still has a very important role here, and I would encourage the candidates to come here, spend a lot of time, and really try to peak on caucus night, so that they can maximize the bounce that they can get out of doing well in Iowa. And if you beat expectations, you might not even win Iowa, but if you beat expectations here and people think you're going to be in the bottom tier and all of a sudden you end up in the top tier, that could be a tremendous boost going into New Hampshire and the subsequent states. That's up to the individual candidates. I'm not going to try to tell the candidates. You know, there's some wonderful people that have already dropped out, like Governor Perry and Governor Walker, and so these are good friends of mine. They're people who have been great governors, and Lindsey Graham, I think, is a great American who has been a great voice for reason on issues, especially foreign policy issues. So even though they're not going to be president, I still think they are great Americans who have made an important contribution to the process, and we should thank them and appreciate them for their participation. And with regard to the other candidates, I let them make their own decisions, but the ones that are serious about it come to Iowa often and spend a lot of time and effort here, and who knows, you just may get a bounce out of doing better than expected here. Okay, thank you.